Joseph Rudyard Kipling was an English short story writer, poet, and novelist. Kipling's works of fiction include The Jungle Book, Kim, and many short stories, including The Man Who Would Be King. His poems include Mandalay, Gunga Din, The Gods of the Copybook Headings, The White Man's Burden, and If. He is regarded as a major innovator in the art of the short story. His children's books are classics of children's literature, and one critic described his work as exhibiting a versatile and luminous narrative gift. Kipling was one of the most popular writers in the United Kingdom, in both prose and verse, in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Henry James said, "Kipling strikes me personally as the most complete man of genius that I have ever known." In 1907, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature, making him the first English-language writer to receive the prize, and its youngest recipient to date. He was also sounded out for the British Poet Laureateship and on several occasions for a knighthood, both of which he declined. Kipling's subsequent reputation has changed according to the political and social climate of the age, and the resulting contrasting views about him continued for much of the 20th century. George Orwell called him a prophet of British imperialism. Literary critic Douglas Kerr wrote, "Kipling is still an author who can inspire passionate disagreement, and his place in literary and cultural history is far from settled. But as the age of the European empires recedes, he is recognized as an incomparable, if controversial, interpreter of how empire was experienced. That, and an increasing recognition of his extraordinary narrative gifts, make him a force to be reckoned with." Childhood. Rudyard Kipling was born on 30 December 1865 in Bombay, in the Bombay Presidency of British India, to Alice Kipling and John Lockwood Kipling. Alice was a vivacious woman about whom Lord Dufferin would say, "Donus and Mrs. Kipling cannot exist in the same room." Lockwood Kipling, a sculptor and pottery designer, was the principal and professor of architectural sculpture at the newly founded Sir Jamsetji Jeejeebhoy School of Art in Bombay. John Lockwood and Alice had met in 1863 and courted at Rudyard Lake in Rudyard, Staffordshire, England. They married, and moved to India in 1865. They had been so moved by the beauty of the Rudyard Lake area that when their first child was born they referenced it when naming him. Alice's sister Georgiana was married to painter Edward Burne-Jones, and her sister Agnes was married to painter Edward Poynter. Kipling's most famous relative was his first cousin, Stanley Baldwin, who was Conservative Prime Minister of the UK 3 times in the 1920s and 1930s. Kipling's birth home still stands on the campus of the J.J. School of Art in Bombay and for many years was used as the Dean's residence, although the cottage bears a plaque stating that this is the site where Kipling was born. The original cottage may have been torn down decades ago and a new one built in its place. The wooden bungalow has been empty and locked up for years and is currently being refurbished and converted into an art museum. Some historians and conservationists are also of the view that the bungalow merely marks a site close to the home of his birth, as the bungalow was built in 1882, about 15 years after Kipling's birth. Kipling seems to have also said so to the Dean when he visited J.J. School in the 1930s. Kipling was to write of Bombay, "Mother of cities to me, for I was born in her gate, between the palms and the sea, where the world-end steamers wait." According to Bernice M. Murphy, Kipling's parents considered themselves Anglo-Indians, and so too would their son, though he spent the bulk of his life elsewhere. Complex issues of identity and national allegiance would become prominent features in his fiction. Kipling referred to such conflicts, for example, in the afternoon heats before we took our sleep, she or Meeta would tell us stories and Indian nursery songs all unforgotten, and we were sent into the dining room after we had been dressed, with the caution, "Speak English now to Papa and Mama," so one spoke English. haltingly translated out of the vernacular idiom that one thought and dreamed in. Education in Britain. Kipling's days of strong light and darkness in Bombay ended when he was 5 years old. As was the custom in British India, he and his 3-year-old sister Alice were taken to England, in their case to Southsea, Portsmouth, to live with a couple who boarded children of British nationals who were serving in India. For the next 6 years, from October 1871 to April 1877, the 2 children lived with the couple, Captain Price Agar Holloway, once an officer in the Merchant Navy, and Mrs. Sarah Holloway, at their house, Lawn Lodge at 4 Campbell Road, Southsea. In his autobiography, published some 65 years later, Kipling recalled the stay with horror, and wondered ironically if the combination of cruelty and neglect which he experienced there at the hands of Mrs. Holloway might not have hastened the onset of his literary life. If you cross-examine a child of 7 or 8 on his day's doings, he will contradict himself very satisfactorily. If each contradiction be set down as a lie and retailed at breakfast, life is not easy. I have known a certain amount of bullying, but this was calculated torture, religious as well as scientific. Yet it made me give attention to the lies I soon found it necessary to tell. And this, I presume, is the foundation of literary effort. Trix fared better at Lawn Lodge. Mrs. Holloway apparently hoped that Trix would eventually marry the Holloway son. The 2 Kipling children, however, did have relatives in England whom they could visit. They spent a month each Christmas with their maternal aunt Georgiana and her husband at their house, the Grange, in Fulham, London, which Kipling was to call a paradise, which I verily believe saved me. In the spring of 1877, Alice returned from India and removed the children from Lawn Lodge. Kipling remembers, often and often afterwards, the beloved aunt would ask me why I had never told anyone how I was being treated. Children tell little more than animals, for what comes to them they accept as eternally established. Also, badly treated children have a clear notion of what they are likely to get if they betray the secrets of a prison house before they are clear of it. In January 1878, Kipling was admitted to the United Services College at Westward Ho, Devon, a school founded a few years earlier to prepare boys for the British Army. The school proved rough going for him at first, but later led to firm friendships, and provided the setting for his schoolboy stories Storky and Co. During his time there, Kipling also met and fell in love with Florence Garrard, who was boarding with Trix at Southsea. Florence was to become the model for Maisie in Kipling's first novel, The Light That Failed. Returned to India near the end of his time at the school. It was decided that he lacked the academic ability to get into Oxford University on a scholarship, and his parents lacked the wherewithal to finance him. So Lockwood obtained a job for his son in Lahore, Punjab, where he was principal of the Mayo College of Art and curator of the Lahore Museum. Kipling was to be assistant editor of a small local newspaper, the Civil and Military Gazette. He sailed for India on the 20th of September 1882 and arrived in Bombay on the 18th of October. He described this moment years later. So, at 16 years and 9 months, but looking 4 or 5 years older, and adorned with real whiskers which the scandalized mother abolished within 1 hour of beholding, I found myself at Bombay where I was born, moving among sights and smells that made me deliver in the vernacular sentences whose meaning I knew not. Other Indian-born boys have told me how the same thing happened to them. This arrival changed Kipling, as he explains. There were yet 3 or 4 days' rail to Lahore, where my people lived. After these, my English years fell away, nor ever, I think, came back in full strength.